This is Frederick Meekins of the American Worldview Alert. Riders of the D.C. subway system were assured not to worry. The strange substance wafting through the tunnels was just construction dust. But wouldn't that be compositionally similar to the clouds of debris sickening and eventually killing numerous survivors of the World Trade Center collapse as a result of ensuing respiratory afflictions? Isn't emphasizing that Tim Kaine speaks Spanish a form of cultural misappropriation if he himself is not of that ethno-linguistic heritage? After all, it is now an offense approaching the level of a thought crime for Yankee imperialists to enjoy tacos at a party. Contrary to a comment from a pulpit, provided that the costumes are reasonably modest, the Bible does not definitively condemn cosplay at Comic-Con. Just because it might be over the top to wear a superhero costume in the pulpit, as this particular pastor suggested, it does not follow that it would be inappropriate to wear such apparel in all circumstances. If we are to take this fundamentalist legalism to its logical conclusion, is one obligated to sleep in a three-piece suit as well, since one doesn't wear pajamas or lingerie to church either? Many participants produce these elaborate garments for the conventions in the hopes of pursuing careers in the special effects industry. So I hope that professional religionists that share in this condemnation also heap hellfire and brimstone upon elaborate Christian dinner theater spectacles, such as the Sight and Sound productions in the Lancaster, Pennsylvania area. A pastor said it is faith and not knowledge that saves an individual. But doesn't that faith require factual content, or that faith could end up being in anything? For some, that knowledge might be the summary statements of the historic creeds, and that is enough. For others, to be brought to faith, they might require more elaborate philosophical proofs or historical evidence. How is contentless faith in faith much different than the swill peddled by Joel Osteen, Benny Hinn, or Oral Roberts at their worst? Authorities assure that the Munich gunman was not an Islamist. Does that somehow give those wanting to return to Earth from the afterlife a free pass or something? A Facebook meme consisting of a black hand and a white hand asks you to share if you have friends of a different race. What that is really saying is that you value this theoretical associate on the basis of skin color, and that you are willing to exploit that relationship in order to score brownie points with diversity mongers and radical left-wing activists. A Facebook theologian remarked, "What does it say about the political party that a candidate who insults minorities wins the nomination?" So apparently insulting minorities now consists of little more than refusing to lick the boots of the ones out to destroy America, or to have a brainwashed grin plastered across one's face regarding such a prospect. Maybe people have flocked to a candidate that insults minorities because of nearly every other party's and candidate's failure to stick up for decent white folks and their productive counterparts among other ethnicities and races. Daniel Darling, the Vice President of Communication for the Ethics and Religious Liberties Commission of the Southern Baptist Convention, has posted an essay at ChristianLeaders.com over the impropriety of vocalizing the sentiment that something is not fair. In other words, pastors and professional religionists shouldn't be subjected to any backsass when they mistreat their respective congregations. It is Pastor Darling's contention that the phrase conditions one into an unhealthy sense of entitlement and sense of justice. But hasn't the Ethics and Religious Liberties Commission done little else as of late but foment each of these in the form of downplaying violent looting in American cities in favor of histrionic denunciations of the Confederate battle flag? Donald Trump insists that he respects working class people. Does that include those he tried to swindle out of their homes in order to pave a parking lot? Regarding pastors that snub their noses at those that might use things like Pokemon or Comic-Con as an outreach methodology, how are these appreciably different than the singing vaudeville vegetables or assorted vacation Bible school puppets employed to draw in children? The Muslim ending the Republican convention in prayer said he could smell the energy in the room. Hopefully it was the aroma of pork barbecue and sizzling bacon. In her speech at the Democratic convention, Michelle Obama ruminated on how we explain things to our children when someone is cruel or acts like a bully. Like when you are told you can keep your doctor when you really can't, or when Christian bakers and religious orders are threatened with financial ruination for standing by eternal principles, going beyond the policy whims of temporary governments? Does the cruel and hateful language she refers to include her husband referring to the grandmother who in large part raised him as a typical white woman? Interesting. Some are such sticklers for religious detail that it is apparently wrong to recommend the works of G.K. Chesterton because he converted to Roman Catholicism. But they apparently have little problem with the church pastored by C.H. Spurgeon being named the Metropolitan Tabernacle. For isn't to name a structure thusly to say this is the only place that God dwells, and with the fulfillment of Christ's work in the New Testament, weren't we taught that God no longer confines himself to specific buildings? Hillary Clinton blames firearms for violence against law enforcement, but conveniently fails to mention the part played in that by progressives such as herself in establishing a political culture that excuses nearly every social pathology imaginable on the part of minorities, and which severely punishes anyone daring to point out these behavioral deficiencies. If Chelsea Clinton is married to a hedge fund manager, what makes the couple morally superior to Donald Trump in terms of creating anything of the kind of tangible value heralded by Marxian-inspired progressives such as her family? Hillary Clinton said Donald Trump does not possess the temperament to be president, and she does, with it having been stated in the past that she hurls lamps and office furniture when slighted. Faith, family, and work are applauded when chanted in a foreign language at the Democratic convention. If called for at a Republican convention or Tea Party rally, such values would be condemned as an existential threat to various assorted lifestyles and an impermissible imposition of values. A number of pundits have suggested that Donald Trump's request for the Russians to release Hillary's emails, if they have them, was treason. But didn't these same propagandists praise Edward Snowden and, quote, Chelsea Manning, end quote, for actually exposing classified information. It has been suggested that Donald Trump calling for the release of hacked emails on the part of the Russians is an act of treason. Should a call for similar charges be leveled against Harry Reid for the senator suggesting that government operatives lied to Donald Trump in the intelligence briefings offered to him as a presidential candidate? Why shouldn't Donald Trump tell a shrill media banshee to be quiet as she continually interrupts him? If the reporter that continued to interrupt Donald Trump had possessed a Y chromosome rather than a second X, would media accounts of the incident have gone out of their way to point out that the correspondent was a man? Before condemning Donald Trump and Ann Coulter for responding to Khizr Khan in a manner other than lodging their noses up his backside, perhaps Democrats ought to address the human turds in the audience that turned their backs on the speech given by a Medal of Honor recipients in their chanting, "No more war." There is nothing in the Constitution stipulating that a veteran or the family of one is allowed to besmirch you in a national forum without themselves getting a verbal smackdown in return. So will Khizr Khan be investigated by authorities the way Joe the Plumber was in the previous election? Perhaps it should be pointed out to Khizr Khan that, unlike Hillary Clinton, at this point Donald Trump is not responsible for the loss of any lives. Interjecting himself into the Khizr Khan controversy, Senator Mitch McConnell insists all service is to be respected. Does that include service on the part of Timothy McVeigh, Lee Harvey Oswald, Nadal Malik Hassan, and Omar Mateen? The best way to avoid having your nude photo spread plastered all across the pages of the New York Post is not to have your nude picture taken. If there is nothing wrong with sexual expression and putting one's body on display in the name of art, what's the big deal? These photos were deliberately staged and not the work of a peeping Tom, nor was Melania Trump the victim of sex traffickers. Why not the public analyze why it is that Trump selected her as his third wife? So does Khizr Khan wiggle his pocket constitution in the face of his fellow Muslims that want to turn the United States into a Sharia-compliant caliphate? Furthermore, wasn't possessing a pocket constitution at one time grounds for raising suspicions that you were a white supremacist, a survivalist, or a Tea Party activist? Applying the logic of Khizr Khan and his special interest devotees, the only ones allowed to criticize Lindbergh's efforts to appease the Nazis would have been those that themselves had a child killed in some capacity by a German. Apparently Islam is allowed to treat its female adherents like excrement, but it is apparently inappropriate for the dhimmis to speculate if what we see transpiring before us might be an example of such. Some are claiming that they will vote for Clinton because Trump is a narcissist. But who was it getting his crotch licked under the desk in the Oval Office? Typical. Obama gave a speech blaming the American people for the way his regime treats veterans. A Washington Post headline claims Trump is the first Republican candidate to win the nomination based on racial prejudice. The astute reader will notice the modifier Republican, for otherwise such a distinction would probably have to be awarded to Barack Obama. According to the logic of Khizr Khan and his devotees in the establishmentarian media, If a gold star parent verbalizes the N-word, is everyone else expected to applaud approvingly as a way for the mourning to articulate their grief? This is Frederick Meekins.